Dorsey's pants clung wetly to legs as thin as broomsticks, and Dorsey's head was horribly slumped, as if it had been caved in the back and consequently pushed up at the front. Oh, hi! You caught me reading to the little one. Speaking of a mix of wholesome and horror, let's talk about Archie horror comics.
Comic tropes. Comic tropes.
Hello! Welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Archie comics. They're well remembered for being wholesome, gag-driven comics aimed at younger readers. But if you go into a comic book store today, you're going to see that they actually have horror comics. And you know what? They're actually quite popular. So how did they get to this point? Where did that come from? That's what I'm going to talk about today. Archie Comics is just about to debut a new TV show on Netflix based on their character Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And it's a horror version of that character. That couldn't be any more different than the 90s sitcom version that they once had. So telling the story of how they got to this point and then discussing whether those comics are worth reading, well, to tell that story, I'm going to have to tell you about the man that they put in charge of the creative direction that was once sued by Archie Comics for copyright infringement. The original Archie series of comics were pretty gentle short stories about some white teenagers in the fictional town of Riverdale. They started being published in 1941 and were directly inspired by the 16 films about Andy Hardy, played by Mickey Rooney. The comics underwent an artistic change in the 1950s when they hired artist Dan DeCarlo, and his work became the house style for the company. If you're thinking about Archie in your head, you're probably imagining the version that Dan DeCarlo illustrated, because for decades it was his work that was on Archie merchandise. It was his artwork that formed the basis for the Archie cartoon in the late 1960s. It was his artwork that was frequently on the covers of those digests that you'd see at the supermarket. Years after DC and Marvel abandoned places like that to sell their comics, Archie comics were still available in public places like supermarkets, and you'd see Dan DeCarlo's art. So that's probably the version that's in your head. And DeCarlo worked for them for many, many years. Eventually, he left them around 2001 over a lawsuit where he argued that he was solely responsible for the creation of Josie and the Pussycats. Now, DeCarlo's creations and co-creations were the basis for where Archie Comics would eventually mature and head in that direction. Aside from co-creating Josie and the Pussycats and Cheryl Blossom, Dan DeCarlo co-created Sabrina the Teenage Witch with writer George Gladier in the October 1962 issue of Archie's Madhouse number 22. While her stories were also teen romance comedies, she introduced the element of the supernatural into Archie's stories whenever she appeared. Jumping forward to 2010, Archie Comics decided to tell a type of alternate continuity story with the title Life with Archie. It was a serialized drama, light on jokes, that took a look at what Archie's adult life might be like in two scenarios, one where he married Veronica and another where he ends up with Betty. Not only was this more serious version a big hit, but issue 23 of the 36-issue series featured a variant cover by Italian artist Francesco Francavilla that proved popular. It was a parody called Afterlife with Archie and featured zombies. The cover came out in 2012 and was such a hit that Archie Publications decided to try it as a series. And for that, they turned to Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa, a comics and television writer who Archie had once sued over copyright infringement. Yes, back in 2003, Roberto created a play while he was in Atlanta called Archie's Weird Fantasy, and it was all about Archie coming out and moving to New York City. And Archie Publications sent him a cease and desist letter threatening him with legal action. The night before the play was about to debut, he had to change all the character names and the title of the play, and you'd think, okay, that's the end of his story with Archie. But cut to 10 years later, and in 2013, Roberto was perfectly positioned to be the guy Archie would turn to write their new Afterlife with Archie series. Roberto was a successful playwright and was hired onto the hit show Glee in 2011 as a writer and producer. That happened in May, and the show had been in talks with Archie Comics to have their characters appear in comic book form that July. Roberto had written some short Fantastic Four stories for Marvel, and his play was about Archie, so he was the perfect person to write the comic Archie Meets Glee, which came out in 2013. It sold well, so he was then tasked with writing the new title Afterlife with Archie alongside artist Francesco Francavilla. And I'm sure you're skeptical if you've never read these before, but I sincerely find Afterlife with Archie to be captivating and horrific and just good reading in general. It's the story of characters that we sort of know just having their lives completely turned upside down and watching who they become when faced with the horror of the zombie apocalypse. Is Afterlife with Archie worth reading if you've never read an Archie comic book? Yes, absolutely. The title kicks things off when Jughead, Archie's best friend, turns to Sabrina. His dog, Hot Dog, was killed in a hit and run, and he begs Sabrina to bring him back. She violates the rules she lives by agreeing to do so and using the power of the Necronomicon to revive Hot Dog. But Hot Dog doesn't come back right. He's a zombie who bites Jughead, and that kicks off a zombie apocalypse. The two main leaders of organized resistance become Archie Andrews and Veronica's father, Hiram Lodge. These two characters would butt heads comedically in the comics, but in Afterlife with Archie, their arguments focus on the best way to save as many people as possible. Archie has a riskier approach, but Mr. Lodge is merciless. Their differing approaches create a lot of the conflict that divides loyalties among the survivors. In the other popular zombie comic of today, The Walking Dead, the leader Rick will often have conversations with his sidekicks, trying to decide the best course of action on a particular problem. But in the end, Rick pretty much always makes the big decisions, and he has to wrestle with any sort of conflict he has internally. But in Afterlife with Archie, we have Archie Andrews and Mr. Lodge, and having two separate characters come into conflict creates a much more tangible reality for us as readers to engage in. I think it's a fantastic way to present conflict, and you'll frequently find yourself dividing your loyalties between both sides, just like the other supporting characters that are stuck in the middle. The very idea of Jughead as the leader of zombies works incredibly well. He's always been a character obsessed with eating hamburgers, but now his insatiable hunger is directed at humanity. The ultimate nonconformist, he acts as a vague head of a horde of flesh-eating monsters. In one great twist, we later get another version of Jughead by issue 8, where he has a deep heart-to-heart with his best friend Archie, and we learn that he is now a ghost. The supporting cast is fleshed out well, with Archie's mom and the Lodge's butler standing out as especially capable adults facing a crisis. Kevin Keller is shown to be very adept with a bow and arrow, thanks to military training by his father. One area that doesn't work as well, in my opinion, is the story of Cheryl Blossom and her probably incestuous relationship with her twin brother Jason. It nearly sidetracks the story at one point, but does result in her emerging from the woods without him, covered in blood, and demanding to be called Blaze from now on. A fairly interesting mystery. Another fascinating mystery is learning that this version of Riverdale agreed to a pact with Sabrina's aunts, preserving and protecting Riverdale as a safe place for all. The trade-off is that the Cooper, Jones, and Andrews families all agree to give them one of their children every generation, culminating in them taking Jughead's baby sister Jellybean. And that isn't even the most horrific thing that happens in the comic. I don't want to give away every twist and turn, but here are a few elements that find their way into the comic to give you a taste of where this story goes. Sabrina, for instance, is captured by her aunts in their horrific true forms and sent literally to hell. She is tortured with nightmarish takes on her memories, and ultimately, we learn that she has been arranged to be the bride of Cthulhu, the otherworldly dark god from H.P. Lovecraft's mythology. Other moments are much more grounded and carry that much more emotional weight. An early scene features Archie being defended from Hot Dog by his dog, Vegas. Being able to read his loyal dog's thoughts and see Vegas's love giving his life for his master is heartbreaking. But even more painful is Archie's first zombie kill, his own father, as he is forced to kill him to defend himself and his mother. The violence in the comic made this Archie's first comic that was sold exclusively to the direct market. I wouldn't call it a total gore fest, but it does have its share of darkness. And I'd probably say it's still aimed at the young adult audience primarily, but I think almost anybody can enjoy it. I do have two issues that reduce how much I can enjoy it. One is that occasionally there are side characters that I think can sort of sidetrack the main plot. An example would be, like I mentioned earlier, Cheryl Blossom's story. That one didn't work quite as well for me. Another is that the comic has come out incredibly slowly. There have only been 10 issues since 2013, and the last one came out 2 years ago in 2016. The comic has been a victim of its own success. Along with Afterlife with Archie, Archie Comics grew up over the last few years. In 2015, they rebooted their comics with what's now called New Riverdale, starting off with a main series by Mark Waid and artist Fiona Staples. I have a review of that on my channel. Following Afterlife with Archie's success, Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa was named the Chief Creative Officer at Archie Comics in 2014 and adapted Archie into the drama series Riverdale for the CW. That debuted in January of 2017 with Roberto as an executive producer. Along with producing that TV series, he also launched a Chilling Adventures of Sabrina comic series at Archie with artist Robert Hack. The comic is set in the 1960s and isn't directly related to Afterlife with Archie, although in one issue, Sabrina has a vision of herself in that reality. The success of the comics and the CW TV show led to Roberto overseeing a Sabrina TV show that was eventually picked up by Netflix. All that work has led to the comics coming out very, very slowly. To make up for the fact that Roberto is working very slowly on these comics, the Archie Horror imprint has launched 2 new series more recently. There's the werewolf horror series Jughead the Hunger. That has Betty Cooper as a werewolf hunter. That one's pretty cool. And then there's a vampire comic, Vampironica. Now that has artwork by Greg Smallwood, and that artwork looks amazing. It's really beautiful artwork. But overall, I would say that the best comic is Afterlife with Archie. They're all interesting in their own right. I sincerely don't have a problem with any of them. I would say that Afterlife with Archie is my favorite. The artwork makes Vampironica probably go into slot number 2, and then the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina comic is very interesting, a very different take, a very different setting, some beautiful painted artwork by Robert Hack. And Jughead, the werewolf comic, somewhere towards the bottom. And I believe that there are plans to release at least 2 more ongoing horror comics at Archie. So it's very popular. It's just where they're going right now. And you know what? They're not doing a bad job at all. You don't have to know decades of Archie Comics history because it's its own continuity. It just starts fresh. But if you already have an understanding of these characters, then we're sort of subverting the types of stories we tell with them, and yet their personalities, the content of their character remains the same. It's just the context, the environment that the characters are put into is completely different. I'm as shocked as anybody, but I'm serious. It's a good read. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about this. Let's take a look at what kind of fan art came in this week. All right, first up we have this impressive piece by Jay Odin, who illustrates manga. You can see links to his comics page, social media, and he even made a video showing how he made this image. Here's a piece by Marcus Mattingly, and he's included his Instagram handle. It's me drinking gross sodas. So gross, they seem to have actual earthworms in them. Keith Stoll delivers this amazing piece featuring Cap Wolf doing stand-up comedy. And if you don't get that, go watch my episode about Captain America becoming a werewolf. Insect Ari provides an especially animated version of me doing my thing. You can see Ari's art blog on Tumblr at that link right there. Adrian Briggs gives us this funny piece based on my Greg Land episode. Adrian is a writer and provides his website where you can learn more about his comic book projects. I love the energy in this artwork by Tyler Garcia. It shows the power behind comic tropes. When I want to, I can shoot energy blasts. And finally, Zero Name made this really cool piece. What's black and white and red all over? This piece of fan art. All right, I have 8 numbers for the 8 different pieces of fan art. I'm going to drop them in the bag of gachapons. If you would like to have your artwork shown on this channel, as long as it has something to do with comic tropes, just send it to this address, comictropes@gmail. If you want your website or your social media to be included, be sure to include that when you send the email. So I'm dropping the numbers in there. We're going to just sort of sort them up a little. And the winner is, hold on, I'm having trouble finding the number. Number 7. Number 7. All right, let's take a look at who number 7 was. All right, number 7 was Zero Name, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think I might have said that there were 8 pieces. There were 7, so I just feel like I said 8. I'm next to positive, but anyway, there were 7. There were 7 numbers, and Zero Name won. Zero Name got this piece, and I'm trying to say, oh, it's a sloth. It's some sort of a sloth figure. It's kind of a big figure. So, Zero Name, you won a gachapon. Let me get your address. I'll mail this out. Folks, I am behind on mailing these out. I've got a stack of them with names and addresses. Sorry, I am incredibly busy. Part of why I'm so busy is not only do I have a full-time job that takes up a little more than 40 hours a week, I'm also doing Inktober this month. That's drawing every month, and I'm live streaming. So every single day, you can catch me live streaming for about an hour and a half, I'd say, right around there. Just sort of a personal challenge, you know? Trying to get better at drawing, trying to get faster, and it's an opportunity for me to open a chat room and talk with you, the viewer. So, I'm doing that every single day. If you've subscribed, you probably get those notifications. Anyway, just wanted to give you a heads up on that. It's a good personal challenge. This was a fun horror comic to discuss because I do feel that while it's popular for Archie, not every comic book fan has given it consideration. But honestly, give it some consideration. Forget whatever you think you know about Archie. Give this a shot if you like horror. It's some great, great drama. It's just well written, and it's got some gorgeous artwork by Italian artist Francesco Francavilla. An Italian artist. That gives me an idea for next week. All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for watching, and until next week, keep reading comics.